Today, we think of pepper as just a common spice for cooking, but it was once the most valuable asset in the world. It was like gold, sometimes even more valuable than gold. And that tiny grain held the entire world in its grasp, the hunger of Europe, the empire of Arab merchants, and the coasts of Asia. It even shaped the history of continental discovery. This is the story of where the Battle of Blood began, where empires rose, and where a global economic revolution was sparked. This is the hidden war for spices. For more than 100 years, pepper was a luxury for Europeans. Their food was bland and monotonous, and preserving meat was a huge problem. Pepper didn't just add flavor, it was used to preserve meat, protecting it from spoiling for long periods. But there were no spices grown in Europe. All spices came from distant lands across the Indian Ocean, from the Malabar coast of India. This was the birthplace of pepper, and the route for this spice was controlled by Arab merchants, who were protected by the powerful Ottoman Empire. They brought the spices to Europe, but they set the prices as high as they wished. As a result, in Europe, pepper became known as black gold. When the Ottomans conquered Constantinople in 1453, the spice route was almost completely shut down. Panic spread across Europe. The economies of entire kingdoms came to a standstill. Europe was desperate. They needed an alternative route, a way around the Ottomans, whose control over the trade seemed absolute. Thus began the War of Spices, a war fought not just with weapons, but with ships, trade, and diplomacy. Europe began its own quest to find a new way to the east, and in this quest, three legendary explorers emerged in history: Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Ferdinand Magellan. They all had the same goal: to find a new sea route to the spices. In 1498, after a long and perilous sea voyage, Vasco da Gama finally arrived in India. This was the first time Europeans had reached India directly by sea. This single event changed the history of the world. Europe no longer had to bow down to the Ottomans for spices. They could now trade directly with India. Initially, the Portuguese started with peaceful trade, but they quickly turned to conquest. They built forts in Calicut, Cochin, and Goa, establishing a firm grip on the coast. This is how the Portuguese Empire was born, an empire with one primary goal: to control the spice route. At the beginning of the 16th century, seeing the monopoly the Portuguese held, the Dutch turned their attention to Southeast Asia. In 1602, the world's first major corporation was formed, the Dutch East India Company. This company was so powerful it could sell shares and even raise funds to wage war. The Dutch started attacking Portuguese ships at sea, occupying their cities and taking full control of their ports. Their eyes were set on Indonesia's spice islands, the source of even more valuable spices like nutmeg and cloves. The Dutch systematically drove the Portuguese from the coasts of Indonesia and established their own monopoly on the spice trade. The British were next to join the game. Founded in 1600, the British East India Company started as a small merchant organization, but gradually, they began to increase their power. They used everything at their disposal: diplomacy, corruption, and political maneuvering to occupy Indian ports. After the Battle of Plassey in 1757, the British Empire effectively took over India, and the spice trade fell into their hands. Spices were no longer just a business. They were the center of everything: power, economy, empire, and war. The greatest cost of this war was paid by the common people. Coasts were destroyed, thousands of fishermen lost their livelihoods, and farmers had their lands taken away. In Indonesia, to protect their monopoly on spice trees, the Dutch destroyed entire villages. These atrocities are often overlooked in history. A peppercorn was worth so much that a human life became cheaper in comparison. The battle for spices has long since ended, but its legacy still affects the world today. The search for a new spice route led to the discovery of new continents. The Portuguese, the Dutch, and the British built empires that changed the map of the world. A single grain of pepper may seem insignificant to people's eyes today, but in history, it was the spark that set empires on fire. That was the hidden war for spices.